Hey Wade, great to have you here today. And I guess I just want to ask you some questions about, well, I don't know, your writing practice, how you teach writing, and what your experience was being a writer in residence here at SFU.
Well, it was great being writer in residence at SFU. And I've experienced it from both sides. So I've gone to visit folks when they were the writer in residence, and I went to see Cecily when she was doing it. And then it was great seeing people. That was my favorite part of it, was seeing people from the public showing me their writing and coming and getting to see all sorts of different writing from people of all different levels of experience as well. Um, I like that quite a bit.
And Cecily, I remember her talking when she started her residency that she had, I think it was very early in her writing career too, she had gone and done a consultation with you. Ask about your writing practice now. What have you been working on lately? I know you just had a children's book come out, is that right?
Yeah, I just had a graphic novel for kids, 12 and up, come out called The Blue Road. And it's about immigration and diaspora, basically, and race, And yeah, it's been really neat. I've been writing about the same themes all through my writing life. So in that way, it's the same. In fact, it even derives from my first book. It's an adaptation of a short story in my first book from 1999. So in that way, it's the same. But what's different is having a really different audience and having an audience of kids, but then also adults read graphic novels for kids, which is something I didn't know, or didn't know that there was a very big audience of adults reading young adult graphic novels, but there is. So that's cool. So it's really interesting. I feel like I'm reaching people who have never read my stuff before. So that's very interesting. And just now, the thing I'm working on now is a long poem. I guess it's a book length poem, a book length narrative poem. It's kind of a surreal slave narrative, I suppose. Um, but it's based on the Argonautica by Apollonius of Rhodes, and I think it's going to be a short book, but it's been taking a very long time to write, as they do these poems.
And I just want to ask you about the Outer Harbor. I just had a just looking at a student proposing to write about it, and I guess that's a book that a lot of people have been reading and thinking about a kind of a speculative fiction take on local histories. And what was your feeling about that book and about how it's been received?
Um, yeah, I mean, felt really good about the Outer Harbor from the moment it was published, and maybe particularly now. I mean, this is the way with books that certain types of books, and this is one of them, that aren't necessarily big commercial hits, but or small press books that are kind of weird and doing some strange things. And I sort of thought it would take about this long for it to find some of its readers, and I feel like that's happening. It's about 5 years after its publication, and just this year in 2020, there have been a bunch of essays published about the Outer Harbor. So that's very, very gratifying to me. The funny thing about it is that the latest, so it goes into the future. So it's a kind of alternate timeline for Vancouver. And at the time that I wrote it, I had it going to the year 2025. And, now that the book's getting some pretty good attention, 2025 is really not very far in the future anymore. It felt like a long time in the future when I was writing it. But, it's an alternate future as well. But no, it feels good, and it's interesting too, catching up to the alternate future in the way that we are now, because, the the reason why I wanted to set it in the future is because of all of it's kind of a counterweight to all of the historical work that I've done. And so all my activist work that I've done in the last 2 decades plus about raising awareness about Vancouver's historical Black community, and doing some history, some actual historical writing as well, and research. And by the time I got to writing the stories in the Outer Harbor, I hit a point of exhaustion with doing all of that work of historical recovery, and was feeling kind of grouchy about it, and tired of it in some ways, but wanting to see things through, as I still do. But in my creative life, I felt like I wanted to really defragment all of that, kind of searching for facts from the past. And I wanted to very deliberately look to a future instead. But it's very informed by all of everything in the past. And that's sort of my perspective, is that things are cyclical, and things that happen in the past recur, and we can start to see patterns. That's the purpose of studying history for me, is to figure out, where are we, and where are we headed, right? And what strategies can we take to change these negative patterns that we have going, racism and capitalism and all these things. And so it's interesting looking at it now. I mean, in the book, I predict an economic collapse that happens, and the book was written very shortly after the 07-08 economic collapse. And I feel like, well, here we are in an economic collapse, right? Because that's what capitalism does. It lurches from collapse to collapse. And that was part of the message of the book. And so it's happening in a different way than in the timeline in the Outer Harbor, but it's happening nonetheless, right? And so in that way, it's interesting to see, as we get closer to the time, it feels less and less like it's not wildly speculative in that way. Some of the technologies are pretty speculative and strange, but even some of those, even very shortly after the book came out, some of those were happening. Like there's a story in the book about holographic crowd control technologies, right? And if you look in just the last little while in Hong Kong, it's like some of the scenes out of Hong Kong are, lasers and projections. And if you look at them, they look like a scene out of science fiction or something like that. And the same thing happened in Spain shortly after the book came out. There was a protest done by hologram, right? By projections, as a way to get around a curfew. So some of the things are quite fantastical, and other things will seem less so, I think, as the years go by. Or the non-lethal crowd control techniques we're seeing used against protesters in the George Floyd uprising this summer. They're pulling out the LRADs and all of those sound cannons and all those exotic police technologies of crowd control. And that's one of the themes in the book, is how to resist, right? How to resist when the technologies of oppression keep changing themselves. And again, look to Hong Kong. People who had no history of fighting, had no history of activism, within a very short time became quickly adept at responding to the kind of latest technologies of repression. And so in that, I see some hope. And I was thinking about that through the book.
Yeah, or even like the traffic cones put over tear gas canisters. See the kids doing that, and then they'd pour something into some water or something.
Isn't it amazing? I mean, it's amazing to people like us who've been doing activism for years and years, and you feel like it's the skill you acquire or something like that. You have some kind of special knowledge, and then you're like, not really. People on the street are creative and figure things out. And there they are, defeating these exotic, that's the hope, right? Is people can do that.
I want to just one final thing as well. I wonder, and in a more hopeful way too, to see the young activists in Vancouver this summer really getting excited about Hogan's Alley. and there was the occupation of the viaduct for a while, and now
Mhm.
there's that mural going up on the viaduct. And for someone who, I mean, your work around that area goes back 20 years, around that historical Black neighborhood of Vancouver goes back over 20 years, and must, I don't know, must have some kind of feeling for you, I would imagine, to see that people who might not have read your book, or maybe did, or they're finding out about this history for the first time, young Black Vancouverites.
I do feel like there's a generational shift, and everywhere across the continent, there's something different, and that's exciting in and of itself. And I think it's still in play, and we'll see where it goes. But just the sense that there's a lot of people. The difference to me, I'm actually writing an essay about this right now. Right, the difference. What I'm writing about is the riots of the past. Right, my parents lived in Watts in LA. They lived in the neighborhood, the Watts neighborhood, not when the riots happened. They had moved just under 2 years before the Watts riots, but they had lived right there as an interracial couple. And so they used to talk about it as this kind of event. This bullet they dodged really was by being in Watts and not being there when the riots jumped off. And then the 92 Rodney King riots were what politicized me. I was sort of political a little bit, but I didn't get active until then. That's what brought me into being an activist of some kind. And then I want to write about those two, and then write about these. And the difference that I see is, they're all the same. They're all started for the same reason. The Watts riot started out of police brutality. Rodney King was obviously police brutality, and same with the George Floyd uprising. Right? They're all the same. It's the same thing. Same things happening, but the media and how people are connecting to it is different. Right? In the Watts riots, nobody knew but the Black community. It was literally just an incident on the street. People saw it, and people knew this happened, and they were mad, right? And with Rodney King, it was the advent of the handy cam. And it was like, oh, now finally there's footage. Everyone can see. This is what cops do to Black people all the time. Now you got footage up. You can see with your own eyes. And that sort of had an impact in terms of going beyond the Black community, sort of. The riots were still basically Black riots in Black neighborhoods, but it was a little broader, and people were kind of like, whoa, yeah, I do see this as evidence of something. The George Floyd riots, the difference is we've had the past Twitter long of people looking at repression after videos of, phone videos of incidents over and over and over again, and everybody has seen it. And so when this riot happened, when this uprising started, that's why it's the first real interracial race riot in the United States against police repression, the first genuine one. And people are mad. It's not just, the way it was in 92 was people were like, oh, this is a thing that seems to happen. Like, it was kind of like that. And with the George Floyd, summer of George Floyd, it was like people were like, no, this has happened again and again and again, and we're pissed. And white people, other people of color, all people were just like, yeah, we're pissed too. Like, this is wrong. This is definitely wrong. That's one thing. And what it's led to tactically is in none of these past uprisings did they burn police precincts and courthouses down. That was not a thing that used to happen. That's intense. I mean, if we're going there, that's different. And so it's a very, very interesting moment that way, I think, with real interesting potential for, interracial an interracial response to racism.